Hi everybody. I wanted to go over today's lecture again. So for those of you that weren't able to attend or moved a little too quickly, I want you to be able to have access to the lecture. So let's start with signup.jsp. What you'll need to do is make sure that you have access to these two files, which are in TMP. You can copy them over. Insert example underscore Campbell and insert underscore example. So insert underscore example is a general template for doing insertions. So you can repurpose that whenever you have to put in data into your database tables. And insert underscore example Campbell is a template for my specific database. So you can sort of see some patterns in there. So copy those to your directory where you're storing all your other HTML things. So you might say copy insert star .jsp to /home, your username, public HTML, etc., etc., etc. Let's see now. Right, so let's take a look at below the covers here. View developer, view source, and we're looking for the form that contains that information. So we type in form, and down here you'll see insert example. So the fields that I've created may not necessarily be your field names. So you just want to sort of refer to your database tables for users and see what you've called them. It's helpful when all the variable names are the same. So mine was email, and my other one was full underscore name, and my other was username, and my other was password. So the program that I'm calling is insert underscore example. You might want to call it insert login or something of your own making so you can keep everything straight. And it's probably a good idea that you write down these program names and variable names before you move on to the code for insertion. So let's take a look at my insert. Campbell example. Okay. Well, actually, let's take a look at from Unix. You can copy it over later. Okay, so it's very similar in some ways to login because you have to pass some variables over. So the variables that are on the right-hand side of the assignment statement, email, full name, username, password, those are the variables that are being passed over when you hit the submit button from a new user. Or no, was it called a new user? No, it's called sign up, right. So then they get placed into Java variables, email, full name, username, and password. Notice the spelling here is slightly different because I use password down here for my database connection. So as you can see, you don't have to have the same variable name, but you do have to have an understanding of what goes to what. So HTML on the right and then Java on the left. Okay, let's scroll down. This particular chunk here, this entire chunk is just for database connection. You're going to want to modify your database name and of course your database user and password. Of course, yours will be slightly different than mine. And then let's take a look at the insertion. So this particular line is taking the parameters that were passed in HTML, stored in Java, and placing them into these placeholders. So these 4 question marks here refer to these 4 variables down here. So it says put email into question mark 1, full name into question mark 2, password in question mark 3, and username into question mark 4. So this is my database, Gordy, and users, and these are the column names inside of the database. So you certainly want to have pancakes open to see what the names of your columns for your table are. So we have HTML variables, Java variables, and database variables. Now, if they all have the same name, of course, that makes things very easy. But they don't have to be. It's just that you have to understand the relationship. Okay. Then we move down to this line, PS execute update, which is part of the prepared statement program. So ps execute update attempts to run the insertion, and if it's successful, it puts it into an integer called status. If it's not successful, you'll determine that by either a 0 or a 1, or a true or a false. So down here, so your data has now been inserted, and because you have auto increment on from user ID as your primary key in the user table, it is going to create a primary key for you automatically. However, before you go to the Instagram homepage, you have to have that primary key. So the primary key is everything. You can't get any data from any of your tables without a primary key. So if the status was successful, that is to say, is if we were able to insert the user information, then status will be 1. So if status is greater than 0 or 1, then we are going to build a query that's going to go get the user ID that was just inserted. So we say select user ID from users, where username is equal to pass parameter username and pass parameter password. So it should only be one user for one username. So that's something to think about in the future, is if someone is trying to register a user ID that already exists, you might want to tell them that can't be. So that would probably live in this program above here. So that's a data check that you're going to have to consider. All right, so we're moving on. We build the query, and then the query gets executed and placed into result set. So result set is like a pointer to the data itself. So in Pancakes, of course, you can see the data, but since the program is running on the server, you can't see the data. So what happens is it gets put into sort of a file, a virtual file in RAM, and you can iterate through it. So here's the iteration. So while rs next, meaning while there is data to be found. Next is returning a bool, so while true. Then you pull in the columns that you need to for this particular step. Now I said go get me the user ID, so of course I'm pulling in the user ID from the result set and placing that number into a variable I call p key, short for primary key. Then I have a bool here found, and I set that to true. And if everything works out okay, I'm going to go forward to index.jsp, that is to the next program, and then I'm going to set the session variable. That's the global variable that holds the p key, so that when I move from page to page, I can retrieve the primary key. Now, I should fix this. This variable needs to go before a response, because if I don't, it will go to the page without setting the variable, so that's that fixed. So make sure you recognize that when you copy it over. Now, if status is not equal to 0, meaning the insert failed, then I need to go back to the login page. Actually, not the login page, but the sign up page. Let me fix that too. Right, done. So if it was an insertion, the insertion didn't work correctly, then I'm going to go back to sign up and pass a variable over saying there was a failure. Typically, unless the database is down, the insertion will work, but it does happen. You have to think of your server as a web server, but typically your database is not stored on the same server. Ours is stored on the same server because we're not doing a high volatile, high amount of inserts, but keep that in mind. Sometimes the insertion doesn't work for whatever reason. Programming is that way, there's a lot of errors. Okay, I think that's about everything that I want to get through here. Yes, very good. So copy over the files, as I was saying before. Insert example Campbell and insert example. And you might want to make a copy of insert example, just sort of like a backup, because you're going to be using that a lot to insert the different things like posts and comments and likes and hashtags, etc., etc. I think that's it.